Let's talk today about Charles Tomlinson and his poem Prometheus. Poet, artist, translator and traveller, Charles Tomlinson was born in Staffordshire in 1927. He studied English at Queen's College and later joined the University of Bristol as teacher. An avid traveller, he was a staunch champion of America and American poetry. As a young writer, Tomlinson was quite overwhelmed by what he thought or what he called the lush poetry of Dylan Thomas. He was not in favor of the romantic tradition of poetry. When he happened to read 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, written by Wallace Stevens, he discovered the kind of poetry that he would like to produce. He was a great admirer of William Carlos Williams, Wallace Stevens, Ezra Pound and Marion Moore. And he shared a very close affinity with them. Like them, he believed that one does not need to go beyond sense experience to some mythic union, and that the I can only be responsible in relationships and not by dissolving into the ecstasy or the oversoul. Here the reference is to the Romantics. He rejected symbolic poetry as representing a view of life too subjective to allow accurate contemplation of the outside world. He again rejected what he called the willed extremism of Plath and Sexton. About the poem 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, he says that it was written in discrete fragments that permitted you to be true to immediate sensations without transforming them into a grand opera. The poem was an exercise in perspectivism and was rich in visual images. Tomlinson's own work is known for its attention to both visual and oral perception, its painterly effects and its cosmopolitan, even urbane style and subject matter. Though he writes of the natural world, his philosophical bent and interest in other places and cultures have made him somewhat an outsider to British poetry. As critic Michael Hennessy puts it, Tomlinson is the most international and the least provincial English poet of his generation. The subjects of his work range from the international to the most domestic. He wrote poems about politics and history. Now, Prometheus here is a poem which abounds in references to many historical characters, especially those related to the Russian Revolution. Tomlinson was not fond of extremes of any sort, be it in arts, politics or literature. He often wrote about establishing an artful relationship between human subjectivity and nature's objectivity. In his collection titled The Way of the World, Tomlinson expresses his strong distaste for extremism of all kinds. The poem taken here for discussion is Prometheus, and it is a highly imaginative poem. The poet has been listening to the radio broadcast of music by the Russian composer Alexander Scriabin. Scriabin was a revolutionary who dreamt that he could change the world with his propagandist music. He sought to rouse the population and instill in them the fire of revolution and brutality. Scriabin composed Prometheus as a tone poem which formed part of Scriabin's world-changing scheme. Listening to the piece, the poet is reminded of the Russian Revolution, the great revolutionary leaders like Alexander Kerensky, Leon Trotsky and Lenin, who never learned any lesson from their experiences with power. They used their power and bloodshed to intimidate and persecute their enemies without pausing to think that, I quote from the poem, "He who howls with the whirlwind goes down." The poet also denounces the revolutionary poets like Scriabin, Alexander Nikolaevich, Turgenev and Alexander Blok, who misuse their artistic power for political propaganda. Even as he listens to Scriabin's music, a storm rages outside the house. Thus he juxtaposes the two events, the artistic and the natural, to each other. Suddenly there is a storm disrupting the radio waves, and now the music is interrupted by a static in the transmission. This static is a figurative for the poet's mockery of art in the service of political propaganda. He seeks to convey that man's powers are nothing in comparison to that of nature. Leaders and their followers may come and go, but nature remains the same or static.